Welcome to another edition of the Invisible Wheelchair Podcast. I'm Donald Grodoff, family coach with FamilyOCD.com and FocusedHealthyFamily.com. In the Invisible Wheelchair Podcast series, I delve into the hidden characteristics of OCD, anxiety, and anxiety disorders. The things that most people don't see, that are behind closed doors and shut within the mind about anxiety. My goal with these podcasts is to bring about awareness of obsessive compulsive disorder, or OCD. Understand that I am not a doctor, therapist, or counselor, and the content, information, resources, and ideas that are talked about and brought up here in these podcasts are things that I have used, discovered, or have been recommended to me, and I always recommend to seek additional professional help in finding solutions for yourself. Thank you for listening and enjoy the podcast. This podcast was recorded March 24th, 2017. This is podcast number 1C, The Look of OCD, Signs and Symptoms of Obsessive Compulsive Disorder. Last podcast we talked about pandas and pans type of OCD. This time, this podcast, I really want to talk about the signs and symptoms of obsessive compulsive disorder. And the reason for doing that is that I feel like if I can help somebody recognize it earlier, get it possibly diagnosed earlier, that can actually speed up the recovery, speed up the healing from that. Especially when kids are young or people are young. That's when it can recover faster. When you start creeping into teen years, it gets harder. And I've kind of learned this from my own personal experience, but also working with clients, and how much this can help escalate the healing part of it. So what I want to talk about today is the 10 signs that I know of for OCD, and give you some ideas of the symptoms and all that go with it, and give you some tips around it. So, because we're dealing with something that is very pervasive, in the world today. Persuasive, well, it is persuasive too, because OCD does kind of throw you off. But it's pervasive in the world today, and whatever I can do to make it more real and bring it out and have people understand it and know the difference between OCD and just being organizational or something of that sort. So I want to start out by these signs, these 10 signs, and again give you some hints on it. So sign number 1, performs excessive rituals or behaviors and does it frequently. And let me kind of go over what I see as some of the rituals that can be done. First, there's hand washing. Now that's the one that's most common. In fact, that's the one I think that has confused most people as to what OCD is. Most people think it's the hand washing disorder or disease. And in actuality, it's just really a symptom of it, a behavior of it. So what you can look for as telltale signs of a hand washing issue that might be OCD is I look for dryness of the hands. Very rough, dry hands, sometimes cracked and bloody. Sometimes when they come out of the bathroom, their hands might be really red because they feel like they have to do it really intense heat to be able to stop the germs maybe, or stop the dirt or whatever. So you can look for that. You can look for a soap dispenser that has to be filled a lot more frequently than you might imagine for the size of a household that you have. And also when they're in the bathroom, you can listen for excessive amount of water running. It might be hand washing, it might be showers. In my family, it happened to be both of those. Mostly hand washing, but showers was a problem too. Washing for 2-3 hours. And so we saw a lot of that, the dryness in the hands and cracking and really bloody hands because of that. Now, the second one is extensive cleaning. Now, that hand washing falls kind of under this category, but that cleaning can be other things like the cleaning the house, cleaning the car. Um, and here again, what I'm going to talk about throughout this podcast is about observation, being very observant of what's going on. Can this person deal with a little bit of dust on a shelf, or something dirty that isn't really bad, but it's just got a little dirt on it? Can they tolerate that? Or do they have to constantly be cleaning something? If there's a little tiny bit of dust, they're cleaning it right away. And if they see that dust and they can't get to it or they can't get it clean, do they fret over it for long periods of time, 2, 3 hours, with anxiety over it? Checking is the third one. Checking doorknobs, checking the stove, maybe the freezer, see if the light goes off. Things like that they check that normally aren't checked, but maybe once. Everybody as they go out the door may reach back and double check the lock just to make sure it's tight or it's locked or whatever. But somebody with OCD will really work at doing that. I've heard it up to 50 times, which can drive people crazy. I've seen people lose their jobs because of it. So when you see it become excessive or unusual amount of times, that's what you want to do. Counting is another one. When they have to count and do like I've heard of people going out the door and have to go out 3 times each time they go out. Or I've heard of somebody that went backwards out through the door and they have to do it several times. There's a certain amount that's locked into their brain that they have to do some function before they can actually move on from it. And if they can't do it, then again, the time of stress and anxiety starts extending to hours of time worrying about it. And you can also, a lot of times, hearing them whisper the numbers or whisper the pattern as they're doing things. So some telltale signs to look for when you're doing that. The next one is exaggerated organization or neatness. Having to have shelves labeled, having to have things in a certain order, a certain pattern. And what I always talk about here is the fact that the difference between an organizational fanatic maybe and an OCD person is an organizational fanatic might be really concerned about the neatness of his desk, yet he doesn't spend hours on it. He can try to straighten it up. If he can't get in, he's got a meeting to go to, he goes to the meeting, or it's the end of the night, he goes home, whatever. Somebody with OCD would fret hours and hours working to try to make it exactly perfect to the rules or whatever. So those are some of the performances that can happen, the rituals and behaviors that can happen under OCD. There probably are more, and I think I know of some more, but those are some of the main ones so giving you some ideas of what to look for. Number 2, there are unusual actions taken by the person, such as avoiding the touching things, walking around things in a bold way that you really want to keep an eye on. Are they avoiding something that normally would be touched, or avoiding something that you normally would walk right through or past or go by it? We had this scenario with my own daughter. She had triggers that would really bother her, and she'd walk 2 blocks out of her way to get around it, and all the while having stress because she even saw it. So, number 3, there are these thoughts that they're having, which this is in obsessive compulsive, it's having rampaging thoughts that cause you to do behaviors to try to stop the rampaging thoughts. And these thoughts basically consume their life. So if you see someone that is just heavy in thought process and then can't get away from it, that might be a sign. And that those thoughts become frustrating, angry, anxiety wrapped around it, all of it. Number 4, these thoughts can be horrific too and negative, based around some false things, unreal things. So you have to be observant to how they deal with these thoughts. We can all have some thoughts at times of, oh, if I could grab that knife right now and stab something, or just out of the blue kind of thoughts for some stupid reason. But they go away. We don't ponder them. We don't sit on them. But somebody with OCD does. And these could be the fear of violence against themselves or someone else. And again, we found this with my daughter. She would have these thoughts that somebody would get hurt if she didn't do things the way she needed to do them, the behaviors. Intrusive sexual thoughts is a big one. Feeling very uncomfortable and having thoughts of some sexual act, and usually perverted kind of sexual act. Another one is obsessing over a relationship, worrying about, without knowing what the other person is thinking. They may not even be there. They're thinking about, she probably doesn't like me. She's probably going to break up. I bet she's going to break up. And just stressing over that kind of thing. And then number 4, needing assurance or reassurance. This is huge. Assurance and reassurance is what I call compensating. And with OCD, the one thing you don't want to do is compensate. And what that means is, I'll give you the example again of my daughter. She was, at one point, she couldn't touch anything. So in order for her to eat, we'd have to bring her food on a paper plate and give her a plastic fork that she could throw away, and a plate she could throw away. So we were compensating for the fact that we shouldn't have to do that. We shouldn't have to bring her a special way of eating. She should be able to come to the table, eat with the rest of us with regular silverware. And so we were compensating, and that compensation literally feeds OCD. And part of compensation is reassurance. The constant need to know that the fact that they're washing their hands for 3 and 4 hours is what's needed to do. And I got to make sure that that's really the thing that needs to be done. And so reassurance, again, is compensating and feeding and growing OCD. Number 5, some person, place, thing, object, whatever, becomes a trigger for them. And it could be multiples. It doesn't have to be just one. It could be multiples. And it can be all kinds of things. It can be a object. It can be somebody. I've worked with somebody that had a problem with their own parent that we had to work through. So these things they stress over. Number 6, these behaviors have really have fluctuating, unpredictable scope and frequencies and length. So they can be hour long, or they could be 10 minutes long. They could happen once a day. They could happen 100 times a day. So there's no rhyme or reason to it. I always called it illogical logic that would drive the person. It didn't make any sense to me, or it didn't make any sense to the other people in their life, but it made total sense to them why they should think the way they think. So there were kind of what I would call imaginary rules that they seemed to know there was some kind of rule that told them what to do and how long to do it. But those rules changed in a heartbeat and never were really solid enough to follow. Number 7, this goes into, again, talking about the fact that these behaviors and these thoughts are illogical and almost dangerous. Because, again, there seems to be in the person's mind some type of rules that are guiding them to the behaviors that they have to do to be able to stop the mind from thinking that, which doesn't really work. It may work temporarily, but it doesn't work on the long, because it just grows. So they have no rhyme or reason, illogical logic, as I said. And I'll give you an example again from my own child's situation. She believed that we had second story bathrooms. All of our bathrooms were upstairs with the bedrooms. So she believed that somebody could come in through the bathroom window and poison the toilet paper. Now, logically, that was not impossible, but pretty close to it, because they'd have to have a ladder. They'd have to cut through the screen. They'd have to cut or get past the lock on the window. So it wasn't impossible, but very illogical. But to my daughter, it made perfect sense. So she'd have to take and unroll the first part of the toilet paper, and it was a lot, and throw it away. So these things don't make any sense. Number 8, these actions or behaviors hinder the person's with OCD from living their life as they did before, or their what would be considered their normal life. It changes everything. It closes life down, makes it hard to do anything. So no matter what, it's changing things. Losing friends, stopping activities that you normally do, just getting out of the house can be a troublesome time. So their life as it was is no longer, and will no longer be, because that changes a lot of stuff. Even for your future life, once you even get past OCD, you are a changed person. Sometimes for the better, sometimes not. Number 9, there are cover-ups. Oh yes, OCD people tend to like to lie or cover up what's going on because they're embarrassed. They don't want people to know what they're going through, or that they have a problem, or that they have OCD. And I find it, they have appearance anxiety, in other words. What's interesting about it is that I believe, like I saw, especially with my daughter, and I've seen with some clients, is that they have a part of their brain that does see this action or this behavior as not making any sense, as illogical. Yet the other side, the OCD side of it, is so strong and so heavy and so dangerous in thought that to fight it seems impossible. So they cover it up. And they cover it well a lot of times. You get somebody out in public who has OCD, you may not even know. That's why I call it the invisible wheelchair. You may not know that they have that problem. And number 10, the last one, sudden onset of behavior and actions could be a sign of OCD being caused by pandas or pans. And I did the last podcast was about pandas and pans. So I would, if you don't know about what that is, and you're just coming to this, I would look back at the archives and find that one, because that onset comes on like a light switch being turned on. So you really want to be very observant there. If you see some strange stuff going on, investigate it. Because again, find it. One of my reasons for bringing this out is to help others, parents, caregivers, individuals who either have OCD or have a loved one with OCD. The sooner, the earliest, the early childhood, whatever, if you can find it early, it can be so much easier to change, because it's not set so heavily. Because, as I say about OCD, all the different disorders really, they're based around anxiety, and anxiety left alone can fester. OCD left alone just grows and grows to be a real monster in the person who has its life, and in the caregiving community or family that surround that person. So I want to get this out. I want to put this out there so that people can possibly see this thing early and do some preventive work. This concludes this podcast. Please remember to leave comments for me, because that really helps me to understand what you're looking for and helps give me fodder for the next possible podcast. Also, I'd love to hear your invisible wheelchair story if you're willing to share it. If you are, feel free to go to invisiblewheelchair.com and click on Tell Your Story. Now, if you've heard these things and you feel like you need further assistance or some help in what you're going through, and you want to spend some time with me working through those issues, then feel free to book a session at focusedhealthyfamily.com or familyocd.com, or simply call me at 704-562-1630. Finally, don't forget there is a tap-in recording following this podcast you may want to take advantage of. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast and will join me for the next one. Remember, keep tapping, talking, and transcending your life into new heights. Thank you, and have a great day.